I am Jacinda Delaney. I am the Customer Success Lead here in APAC for Searchspring. So I work with all of our wonderful customers in region who have had a lot of questions around GA4 leading up to this week. So we thought this would be a really great opportunity to do a webinar with Kate Collinson, who is a GA4 expert. I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm an e-commerce growth marketer, and I specialize in a lot of GA4 these days, and I'm looking forward to packing this session with as much info as possible about GA4 so we can all go into financial year 24 with confidence.
Just a quick overview on the way that Searchspring uses GA4 within our console. So within our console, we pull in some data from GA4, and we use this around logic for best-selling and trending products. So to be ready for GA4 and Searchspring, there's just a couple of steps that you'll need to do to get your audience ready and to connect. So we'll send through some information after this as well, but recommend as an action from this, going ahead and creating that Searchspring audience within GA4, and then looking to connect within the next few days. So moving on, just a very quick screenshot here showing what we do bring in from GA. So those of you that are customers would be familiar with this, but we bring in items per purchase, item quantity, revenue, unique purchases, all of this data we use for your boost rules. And just moving on from that as well, just some information here around how we can check your data as well. So once we do get connected to GA4 within your console, it's really important that we go and we check and make sure all of that data is coming through. So again, after this, we'll have some comms going out that will talk you through these points, but just a couple of things to start thinking about as we approach the end of the week.
Great. Okay, thanks guys, and welcome to this webinar. I am going to talk to you about how to master Google Analytics 4 to grow your e-commerce store. So today I'm going to pack in as much as possible I can about GA4 and what you need to know. This definitely isn't going to be a presentation for data scientists or developers. I'm going to be explaining GA4 and how it's most relevant to store owners and marketers. So people like you and I who don't necessarily speak the code, but are in charge of those investments, channel investments, managing the store, trading the store on a day-to-day basis. So if anything doesn't make sense, please, throughout this presentation, drop some questions below because we'll have some time at the end to answer them. Firstly, just a little bit about me. I am an e-commerce consultant and growth marketer specializing in Shopify and Shopify Plus, and I have over 10 years experience in e-commerce specifically, having both worked abroad in New York City as well as here in Australia. I'm very much a hands-on consultant, and I love getting my hands dirty on the tools. So everything from data and analytics to digital strategy, customer relationship management tools, and paid media are really areas of expertise for me. I'm also the director of Chorus. So Chorus is a freelance collective of some of the most experienced e-commerce growth marketers in Australia, and we are a growing bunch, usually ex-agency, and we work with a lot of very exciting, fast-growing Australian brands. And Google Analytics is really the core tool we use. It's what brings together our collective actions and something that we can look at as a single source of truth to analyze the impact of our actions on the bottom line for our clients. Here are a couple of the stores that we've worked with. So Nimble Activewear, the Memo Roundhouse, Steel, Cat the Label. Usually these are sort of small to medium-sized brands that we've worked with to grow anywhere between 50% to 400% growth in a single year. And we do that through all of our combined efforts. Now, firstly, I want to talk a little bit about GA4 and why it is so pivotal to e-commerce growth. So GA4 was released in October 2020, and there are some really, really great new features and an entirely new structure. It's basically a complete overhaul of universal analytics. So firstly, there's an events-driven data model, which is slightly different to what we are used to in universal analytics. There's also improved user ID tracking, so the ability to track a user throughout their multiple sessions and multiple devices. There are new metrics and dimensions that are, I guess, an evolution of what's happening on the internet and the way that customers are behaving. And there's also a new focus on user acquisition, which we can really use to our advantage to manage our top of funnel investments. So firstly, I want to talk a little bit about the events-driven data model. So Universal Analytics was really designed originally around page views and sessions. And remember, that was released back in 2009. It was quite a long time ago. And events was sort of this add-on where you could track custom actions or those that were sent through native integration. So for example, if you're on Shopify, you would have automatically been able to see add to cart video views, all those other sort of events as automatically tracked events. And then you may have also been able to set up some custom events like banner clicks on a homepage banner through a tool like Google Tag Manager. The issue with this, though, is that the internet has since changed, and the increase in mobile usage means that we see a lot more single-page websites. Sessions are actually becoming a little less relevant, and what we're more interested in is what actually happens on those particular actions on those particular websites. So GA4 is actually designed entirely around events. We still have sessions, but now even a session is an event. Along with a whole new raft of events such as remove from cart, view item, view an item list, which is view a collection. And what this essentially means is it gives us more flexibility with the data. By stripping out the need to have a session from an event, we're left with the events, the event parameters, and the user properties. So user properties tells us what we sort of know about a user. For example, what channel did they first arrive on? What country are they in? And then for each event, we have event parameters, which tells us more about the event itself, such as which specific item was added to cart, what was the cart subtotal when the begin checkout event started, etc. So you can see there are all these different little building blocks of data, which enables us to really take that raw data in Google Analytics and slice it up as is relevant to our business and our goals. So just to give you an example, we might have a user with an anonymous ID in Google Analytics 4. Then each user would have specific properties. For example, they might come from the US, they might be arriving on mobile, and they might be between a certain age bracket. And then if they were to create an event such as an add to cart, we will then also see in Google Analytics potentially the item name that was added to cart, the item category, and the item price. So it's not to say that this information wasn't available in Universal Analytics, but it has been restructured. Basically, GA4 is trying to address the raft of privacy changes which have come into play over the last several years. Think about GDPR, the death of cookies, Apple going after the likes of Facebook ads with iOS 14. This is all an attempt to address this and upgrade the way that GA collects data. So this sessionless data makes it far more easier for us to anonymously track a single user across multiple devices and multiple sessions, because we know that users are on multiple devices and sessions. The more we can actually connect those dots, the better we can understand our true path to purchase. So moving on to user ID tracking, that's a really exciting new part of Google Analytics 4. All marketers really wish the path to purchase looked something a little bit like this. Say, for example, they see a Facebook ad on Instagram, they browse the store, they might add an item to cart on store, then they immediately purchase. That's what we all wish was the case, but we know that that's simply not at all true. In reality, customers are jumping between channels. They might see an ad on Instagram, then they might visit the Instagram profile instead of clicking the actual ad and browse Instagram shopping. And then from there, they might actually visit our store, browse. They might even just sign up to email. And then it could be 3 days or even weeks later before the user returns to store. Potentially they receive an email from us, a welcome series or a campaign email. Then they might hit our store and then add to cart, but then they might abandon cart. Maybe they're looking for a discount code and they might be on a discount code referral site and then click back to store from that referral site, and then they make a purchase. So it's very challenging for us when it comes to tracking attribution to understand that true customer path to purchase. To make matters more complicated, they're also jumping between different devices. They might be browsing on their mobile, but then they might be like, no, I prefer to purchase when I'm at work on my desktop or at home on the couch on my iPad. And there's going to be separate sessions, but it's still the exact same user. So how is it possible for GA to track these users so we can identify this path to purchase and attribute sales with any measure of accuracy? Well, user ID tracking is what is helping to solve this. So user ID was definitely present in UA, but it's much more developed in GA4. GA4 associates each user with an anonymous ID. This isn't an email or any other data that we might have in our CRM or our e-commerce platform. And this works best when a user is logged into their account. GA4 will actually stitch together the data if the user logs in mid-session as well. So, that means that it's really beneficial if we can incentivize the user to log in through benefits or loyalty programs. But the other building block to user ID tracking is Google Signals. Google Signals and AI modeling help to complete that picture by looking at users who are signed into Google, or looking at patterns from other signed-in users to model the AI. So there's a bit of a hierarchy to how this works. Firstly, they look at that user ID, then they might look at Google Signals, and then they would look at the AI modeling. The thing to note, and what I will be hammering home today, is that this feature actually needs to be manually turned on. For some reason, it is not automatically turned on. You need to make sure that Google Signals is enabled because it is, subject to legal requirements, GDPR, and you can do that in your settings as well.
Kate, we've also had a question from someone. With user IDs, there are some restrictions about using emails as an ID. Can we use a hashed email? What is the best ID to use? And then just on top of that as well, how long is Google keeping this information that's attached to this user ID?
Sure. So not to my knowledge, you can use emails. What Google will do is actually take that specific user information and convert that into an anonymous user ID. So Google will not hold any email data or any identifying data of the user due to privacy requirements. That is more something that would sit in your CRM. That's not to say that those pointers might be used by Google, but they are definitely not sitting in Google as data. In terms of how long this data will be retained, the default is 2 months, but you can actually, this user ID connection can be expanded up to 14 months in your settings. So I also recommend you go to your settings and complete that as well so that you can maximize the duration of this, connected user ID tracking data, if that answers the question. I'll move on to some of our new metrics. So bounce rate is back. Initially, when GA4 launched, it launched without bounce rate, and we thought they were going to be doing without bounce rate entirely. But now we actually have something better, which is called engagement rate, which I'm a really big fan of. So firstly, we have engaged sessions. So an engaged session is a session that lasts over 10 seconds, had an event, or had at least 2 page views. That's what Google is identifying as a quality session. So previously with Universal Analytics, we really only looked at a session. We didn't necessarily know, aside from bounce rate, what the actual quality of that session was, unless we looked at other metrics like pages per session and average session duration. But even an average session duration is quite relevant if the user is just sitting on that page and they're not visiting any other pages. So engaged sessions gives us a little bit more clarity there. Engagement rate, which I love the most, is actually the percentage of engaged sessions. And it gives us an idea of the quality of that session against our site average. The reason I like a rate in any circumstance is that it gives us context. So engaged sessions is just a number, it's just a metric. It doesn't necessarily tell us much unless we were to actually figure out what that means. Engagement rate, being the percentage of engaged sessions, really gives us an idea as to the context of that. That gives me a contextual metric. And then finally, we have engagement time per session, which gives us an idea of the average length of time the site was in focus in the browser during a particular session. I think this metric is also really, really interesting because what it tells us is, say, for example, if someone is browsing a whole heap of products off of Google Shopping, they might be opening multiple tabs. Google in Universal Analytics might be counting that as a valuable session, but really, unless that customer is actually staring at our screen at the time, I'm not that concerned about that particular session. So the average engagement time per session gives me a really good idea as to the quality of that session as well. Bounce rate was always a little bit dodgy when it came to looking at quality of traffic, because it was analyzing the number of single page sessions. And in this day and age, when we have long scrolly pages, a one-page visit could still be a really, really valuable customer reading reviews on a product detail page, for example. And it's based on how the user actually engaged with that page. Engagement rate, I really like it because it's more of a nuanced metric. The point of this is that it adds a bit more depth to measuring an engaged user. So where iOS 14 was tracking purchase back to add to click, that's increasingly more challenging for us. So metrics like engagement rate can really give us a little bit more insight into the quality of the traffic we're driving from other platforms where we might not be able to connect the dots between that ad click and that eventual user on site.
We just have a question here for you as well. Sorry, Kate. I know benchmarks are a little bit tricky, but we have a question around what is an idea of a healthy engagement rate or a benchmark for engagement?
There's absolutely no benchmark that you should be caring about except your own historical data. So I always say steer clear of benchmarks. Obviously, you want to be doing better than last month or better than last year through the actions that you're taking on site. Obviously, engagement rate, much like conversion rate, is going to be heavily impacted by the kinds of traffic you're sending to your site. So, for example, if you're investing really heavily in cold traffic, you're going to have less returning users. You're going to have a lower engagement rate because these users are not brand aware. So that's a very difficult question, and engagement rate should really only give you an idea or a conversation, I suppose, to have with whoever manages your various channels around the quality of the traffic that's being sent to your site. I would say look at it in context. So look at it, and I will definitely show you some examples in these following slides on how you can analyze that against all your different track channels. So if you're analyzing engagement rate, we're looking at it against our different channels and identifying which channels are driving the stronger engagement rates. So there's no benchmark at all. You should just be looking at it as a yardstick against your own metrics, if that makes sense. Now, I'll move on to new dimensions. So I'm a really huge fan of this because I do a lot of channel strategy and paid media. And we now have a dimension called first user source medium. So this ties in really, really closely with user ID tracking. And the way GA4 is structured is really around the channels that are driving new customers. And they call these first users. Technically, this was definitely possible in UA with some crafty segmentation, but this really gets us focused around which channels are driving growth. So we have this new metric called first user source medium, which is the source medium by which that user was first acquired. So instead of you looking at metrics like new versus returning sessions, we can actually identify which channels are driving some of our strongest new user traffic and user engagement rate to determine the quality of that traffic. So, for example, we might see that email and SEO traffic drive some of our strongest conversions. But if we're seeing TikTok driving a really, really highly engaged new user, then despite challenges with privacy, we can really interpret how this channel is positively impacting growth, even if we're not seeing a resulting direct conversion. We also have something like our first acquisition date. So Universal Analytics was heavily reliant on last click attribution. So it would only attribute revenue to the channels that were the last channel in that customer journey, which we know only gives us a very small slice of the picture. The first acquisition date is the date the user first visited the store. So if a user were to complete a purchase about 90 days after their first acquisition date, we now have some really great insights into our timed purchase and the channels driving that new purchase, rather than simply relying on last click attribution. So you can already see how GA4 is just miles ahead of Universal Analytics in terms of helping us better interpret that channel mix. We also have conversion rates. So the reason I'm mentioning this is that when GA4 was first launched, they launched without a conversion rate. And that was a bit crazy because, a vast majority of GA's users are e-commerce stores. So it was something that we were able to obviously calculate ourselves, purchases over sessions or purchases over users, but it's finally been added back in as an actual metric, but it's now split into two different scopes. So we've got our session scoped conversion rate, and that's the percentage of sessions that resulted in a purchase. But now with user ID tracking and our better ability to track a user over multiple sessions, we have our user conversion rate. And this is really exciting because we're able to look at channels, say, for example, the first channel that a user arrived on, the first user channel, and then look at the user conversion rate over multiple channels. So if we're looking at something like a broader time period, we're able to see whether that first channel was able to drive a higher user conversion rate, not just a last click session conversion rate. And that is super, super valuable when we're looking at the performance of our top of funnel investments as well. Finally, we have our user lifetime value. So we have a new retention section under reports in GA4 where we can see customer lifetime value. This has always been a super important metric that we have sometimes had to rely on third-party tools or some calculations in our CRM and Excel. And now it's actually sitting here in GA. It does take some know-how with custom reports to actually understand this data, but the bare bones are there, and Google will surely be developing this out further as accounts gather a little bit more data so we can look at this over the course of months and years. But what it allows us is to answer specific questions, such as things like which channels are driving our highest lifetime value over time compared to short-term values. So looking at the source, the medium or the campaign that drove users with the highest lifetime revenue, as opposed to revenue for that specific month, can be really, really valuable when we're doing quarterly assessments or annual assessments. We can also see which paid campaigns are acquiring some of our most profitable users over time. So the users which are expected to be more valuable with higher purchase probabilities and lower churn probabilities can be really, really valuable when we're making those decisions on channel investments. And then also, when did monthly active users last purchase on average? So uniquely looking at user behavior insights, such as when those monthly active users last purchased a specific product from your site, or when they were last engaged with your site.
Can I throw a question in here for you as well, Kate?
For sure.
Lifetime value. This is definitely something that came up a lot in the questions that we had people send through. This part of GA4 around lifetime value, how much of this requires setup by a customer and how much of it will come with the GA4 setup?
So there are some audiences that require setup based on predictive analytics if you want to use those in conjunction with Google advertising. But really, I mean, the biggest barrier to using this data at the moment, aside from it being a little bit of confidence with exploration reports and understanding how to read these reports, is actually probably just having the data in your account. So a lot of people haven't set up GA4 until this year or late last year. And as a result, they don't have a lot of that information in their account. I'll get to this a little bit later, but having the specific e-commerce data as well is really important. A lot of people didn't necessarily have e-commerce data in their GA4 accounts when they initially set them up until Shopify released the native integration or they set up something custom. So that is the biggest barrier at the moment. It is still, I'd say, a bit of an underdeveloped area. There is a report I'm going to show you a bit later that everyone can use, but again, it's going to be limited by the date range that you're looking at. So user lifetime value is, of course, always more beneficial the broader the time frame that we're looking at. And a GA4 account is only as good as the data from when it was set up.
Thank you.
I just want to talk a little bit about attribution in GA4 as well. So Google is actually removing 4 attribution models. First click attribution, linear attribution, time decay, and position-based attribution. Just recently has been announced that they will be removing that in September this year. What is new is called data-driven attribution, which is the default new model in GA4. We also still have our last click attribution as well. Google's justification for this is that rules-based attribution models are a bit old school and they don't adapt to the real customer journey. What data-driven attribution uses is advanced AI to determine the impact of each channel and assign credits to each channel. I don't love this. It is, and a lot of us are quite disappointed in this change from Google. It gives us a bit less control and less insight, and it's definitely a bit of a trend that both Google and Facebook are heading into with AI modeling of attribution, where we don't really know what models are being used or how accurate they truly are. But by comparing attribution models, particularly first click against last click, we were able to understand the impact in universal analytics. But what it just means is that we're going to need to be looking more closely at which channels are driving these first users. So looking at that first user acquisition report, understanding first touch channels in the absence of first click attribution models. And instead of looking at attribution model comparisons, which we might have relied more heavily on in UA. The thing to take away from this is that data-driven attribution isn't currently that different from last click attribution. There may just be a few minor credits assigned to different channels, but it won't change anything too drastically in the short term. It will just be a question of what that eventually evolves to in the long term. I want to now talk about 1 July, which is this coming weekend, and talk about why this matters to e-commerce stores and what you should be doing to prepare. So from 1 July, Universal Analytics will be stopping recording events. This won't be happening instantly. Google will be rolling this out over time, but all stores within a couple of weeks will be forced to move on to GA4 on or around this date. Universal Analytics historical data that's sitting in your current or old Google Analytics account will be available for about 6 months, but then sometime after this, at a future date, which hasn't been confirmed, Google will be deleting this. So that is what is happening from the 1st of July that you need to be aware of. What you should be doing to prepare is quite simple. So first of all, you need to ensure you have an accurate GA4 integration set up. So whether that's a native integration or something more custom, you need to make sure that's set up. And ideally, you want to be connecting all of your products to that. So your Google Ads, your Merchant Center, everything else that is tied together with Google Analytics, typically, you want to make sure that that is connected in GA4 as well. Secondly, I am strongly recommending to everyone I'm working with that we that we back up our Universal Analytics data as soon as possible. The reason being that this future date that Google is talking about is an unknown, and it is really best practice to be backing that up. Historical data is absolutely integral to understanding your performance ongoing. As I said, the real metric you should be comparing yourself to understand the performance of your store is your previous year's data, the previous month, looking at improvements over time or changes over time. Data in isolation is not going to give you much insight at all. So it's really, really important that we maintain this data. And I am a little bit concerned that it's not something that's being spoken about much in the industry at the moment, that Universal Analytics will be deleted. And there's a couple of options that I can run you through to make it really super easy to back up this data so you can have it ongoing. And then finally, I really recommend you start using GA4 as soon as possible. So transitioning all of your dashboards, whether it's in Looker Studio or Power BI, whatever you're using, transitioning all of those to GA4 so that you're not caught out. All of your reports and any kind of daily activities that you're using in GA4, making sure that you're not going to be caught out when this weekend hits. Otherwise, it's going to cause a few challenges. I just want to talk a little bit about integration options first. So there are 2 types of integration, similarly to UA. So there is a basic integration. So when GA4 was first released, they said, just copy paste this global site tag to your header code. Unfortunately, that's not that simple, and very much like enhanced e-commerce and universal analytics, there is a lot of custom setup that is required. In addition to that, you do get something like a simple purchase event and some revenue flowing through, but we don't get the really valuable other e-commerce events or the parameters like the item names and the item price and everything else that gives GA4 the real richness of data for e-commerce. When we look at a full e-commerce integration, we get not only all standard events, but we also get the purchase event, revenue, and all those events, e-commerce events and parameters. And this is either set up through a native integration such as the Shopify GA4 native integration, or through a custom integration with Google Tag Manager if you're on another platform. If you can really see the difference between the different events that you can track. So for example, with our standard events, we can see things like first visit, scroll, click, even potentially add to cart. But with a full e-commerce events integration, we can see things like view item list, which is view collection pages, begin checkout, remove from cart, all of those actions that we might want to be troubleshooting on our site when it comes to user behavior. So I very strongly recommend that you make sure that your GA4 integration is accurate and not just a copy paste of some code, because it is really important.
Just a question there for you as well, Kate.
Sure.
In terms of the integrating GA4, you've obviously got your standard events there and you've got your full e-commerce events. For some customers that are, maybe a little bit smaller, they don't have the technical resources or a larger team, what's the best way they can go about setting these up? Is it through, working with an external agency or having someone set these up for them?
Yeah, I mean, first I would analyze whether or not there's a native integration available, which includes the full e-commerce integration for GA4 for whatever e-commerce platform you're on. Majority of small businesses that I work with are on Shopify, and look, the Shopify native integration is missing some of these events. It's not completely perfect, but it is better than nothing in terms of integrating GA4. I do strongly recommend checking that out. If you are on a platform that doesn't include a native integration, you are going to need to look at a custom setup through either a third party or through a data scientist or developer with Google Tag Manager. So there are unfortunately some hurdles to GA4 depending on the e-commerce platform that you're on.
Thank you.
Great. The other thing I just want to touch on briefly, because it is increasingly a conversation I'm having with clients, is the difference between client-side integrations and server-side integrations. Very, very basically, because I know this is getting a little bit dev heavy, client-side integrations is where the user data is collected from the browser. So it's a tag in the code that sits at the browser level. Often, if there's a native integration, this will be a client-side integration. Server-side bypasses the browser entirely. So we are looking at the server sending data through to Google Analytics, bypassing the browser. So with client-side, the benefits are that it's cheaper, it's easier to set up. We tend to see no ongoing costs or very little ongoing costs with a native integration or a client-side integration. The only drawback is that it is 10 to 20% less accurate, because we are looking at things like privacy blockers and, any kind of cookie, the ongoing, dismissal of cookies from browsers is going to cause some future issues when it comes to integrations. We are also seeing slower performance sometimes with tracking scripts for client-side integrations, as well as there can be some security risks when it comes to third-party data that a larger client might be a little bit concerned of, particularly from a legal perspective. Server-side integration is almost 99% accurate, because what we're doing is the server, for example, Shopify, is sending that data through to a cloud, a Google Cloud warehouse, and then through to Google Analytics. This data is much, much better for performance and for SEO, because it is not sitting at that browser level where it is loading for the user. It is also tends to be first-party data that is owned by you in this data warehouse. So that is generally preferable for a lot of larger clients. The only downside is that it is costly sometimes to set up, and it does have ongoing server costs involved for the hosting of that server. But it's just something to consider depending on your size and depending on your own legal requirements.
Two questions for you here, Kate. Shopify questions. Is there a third-party app that you recommend above the native integration? And also, if they have used the native integration, do they still need to set up events in Google Tag Manager?
You can look at setting up custom events in Google Tag Manager in addition to the Shopify native integration. That would require a little bit of know-how with Google Tag Manager, and I would probably recommend looking at a data scientist to help you out there. In terms of the server-side integration, I would recommend looking at a service called Little Data. They're the one that I tend to rely on most heavily for server-side integrations. They do come at a cost, an ongoing cost for the server fees and for their service, but their response on support is fantastic, and it is very, very simple and easy to set up. So I do recommend checking that out as well as a robust server-side integration option, Little Data. Okay, so when we're looking at accurate setups in GA4, I just want to just run through a quick checklist of what you should be looking at for accurate setup. Firstly, you should be excluding self-referral and internal traffic. You should be enabling Google Signals for user ID tracking. You should be setting up cross-domain tracking if you have multiple domains on your store, and expanding your data retention for user ID tracking to 14 months. And then finally, you should be looking at connecting your Google products as well. I'm just looking at time right now, and I'm going to spin through a few more of these slides because we've got some juicy ones at the end that I really, really want to get to. So I want to run you guys quickly through 3 options for saving your historical data in in Universal Analytics. Firstly is you can manually export within Universal Analytics some custom reports to Google Sheets. This can be a bit of a laborious process. It's very manual, it's very basic and time consuming, and you need to make sure that you're capturing the right dimensions and the right metrics that you might need to look at on a historical basis. My preferred option is using Google Sheets and using the add-on for Google Analytics through the Chrome browser. This is where you're able to automatically export key reports by date. You can use Data Studio to visualize and manipulate that data from within Google Sheets. This is definitely the approach that I prefer. It's a little fiddly in terms of identifying the dates and the dimensions and the metrics that you require. But it is something that I do provide templates for in my online course. And it's definitely the quickest and easiest way to back up your data as well. Finally, there is the option to export to BigQuery that I just wanted to touch on. It is, BigQuery is a data warehouse. Think of it as sort of like a cloud-based drive that you can store all of your data and then import it to another platform. It's entirely owned by you. The only thing is that it can be a bit complex. This may really work for data scientists and developers, but for smaller stores, it's really not that marketer friendly. And it does often require third-party connectors, which can get a bit expensive to export that data from Universal Analytics through to BigQuery. I will briefly mention, though, that GA4 does have a free BigQuery backup integration option. All you'll need to do is pay for the Google Cloud data for when you're exporting a GA4 data to BigQuery. So if you're very confident and you have a confident developer, you might want to look at BigQuery. I still think that the Google Sheets Chrome add-on is a fantastic option for the vast majority of stores. So I really recommend you look at that as well. I want to go into a couple of examples of GA4 in action before we get to some questions. So just to give you an example of how I'm currently using GA4 to grow some of the revenue of my stores that I work with. Firstly, engagement rate is invaluable when it comes to growing GA4 data, growing revenue using GA4. It's just in terms of the metric, in terms of understanding the quality of sessions. So where you'll need to go is to your acquisition, your report section of GA4. Under acquisition, you'll find traffic acquisition based on session data. And here you can drop down the dimension to look at your session source medium. And from there, you'll be able to see all of these metrics, these engagement metrics by your session source median. Now, keep in mind, this is just each session, not particularly the first user source median we're looking at this stage. It's just to understand the quality of our traffic. We might identify, for example, that average engagement time per session is particularly strong for Instagram paid media and for Google organic traffic, as opposed to something like TikTok paid traffic, where we're seeing a very low engagement time. That would really give me a strong idea of the value of that traffic that I'm driving and paying for. And then from there, we can also see the number of events per session. So we can see how many events on average is each user taking when they spend a session from that particular source medium source. So unsurprisingly, Google paid, Google organic, and Linktree are seeing some really, really strong events per session. But I might want to look into Linktree Instagram, which is the organic Instagram profile. I might want to look at ways that I can expand that and ways that I can invest in more traffic there if I'm seeing such a high average events per session. And then finally, I can look at engagement rate. So again, looking at the percentage of sessions that were actually engaged sessions on my site. So here I might say that Google organic traffic understandably would have a high engagement rate. That is people usually searching for brand terms, usually looking for me specifically. So that would be understandable that engagement rate would be high. But again, Linktree in this instance, people coming from Instagram, users coming from Instagram are highly engaged on my store. So that would be where I would say, well, it might be worth encouraging more organic efforts, more paid efforts towards that particular traffic source. We can do a similar thing when it comes to first user acquisition. And this is where user ID tracking can be really, really valuable to better track the value of our top of funnel investments. I know that with the increase of privacy and iOS 14, it has been really challenging because attribution can necessarily overlap between platforms, and a lot of platforms are introducing these AI-driven attributions. So we really do need to look at the broader picture. And at Chorus, we really run a lot of paid media. 70 to 80% of that is cold traffic. And we really need to understand and be able to track that user from a campaign basis, from a traffic basis, channel basis, through to their final conversion. So if we look at our user acquisition report and say we again drop down to our first user source medium, we'll be able to again see these same channels, but they are actually now divided into the channel that was the user first landed on or first discovered our store to GA4's knowledge. And of course, that means that it also depends on when you set up your GA4 account. If it's only recently set up, everyone will be a new user. So do keep that in mind. But if you do have, if you have been running GA4 for a little while, you will be able to get a lot of value out of this report. So we might, for example, here see engagement rate, again, very high for something like Google Organic and for Linktree. We might then look at things like engagement, average engagement time. So now we know this is cold audience traffic. This is first users. We can see that first users who arrive from Google Organic, brand terms, highly engaged, that's understandable. But again, maybe looking at things like email and Linktree on Instagram, seeing that that is a highly, highly engaged user, and we might want to scale our efforts there. I can also drop down the event count column and look at things like add to cart. I like to use add to cart as a bit of a sub-metric. So if we're looking at a first user, they're not always going to make a purchase within the first session, maybe not even in the second, but I would like to see them looking at items. I would like to see them adding to cart. What I would really hope that GA4 develops here is an add to cart rate. We used to have a little bit more of these sorts of metrics, contextual metrics in Universal Analytics. At the moment, we're able to set custom metrics in GA4, but we're not able to create a metric such as add to cart rate. And what that would do is really give me an idea of what percentage of those engaged users or those users are adding to cart. And that would give me a really good idea of the quality of those cold audience investments as well. And then I can also look at my user conversion rate. This might be something you need to edit your default report to look at, but the user conversion rate can give me a really good idea as to, over a course of multiple sessions and multiple devices, at what rate is that specific user, not just that session, converting to a purchase. Really, really valuable when we're looking at source mediums as well as campaign performance, if you have all your UTMs set up correctly in your paid investments. I want to talk about custom channel groups. So one of the biggest changes in GA4 is that custom channel groups can now be applied retrospectively. So for example, if I notice that my Linktree traffic is actually unassigned, it's not assigned to any of the default channel groups in my GA4 account, I want to make sure that that is assigned within a custom channel group. So what I can do is go to my admin, go to my data settings dropdown and select channel groups. And then from there, I can create a new channel group. Unfortunately, unlike Universal Analytics, I can't edit my default channel group, but I can go and create a new channel group for a custom channel group, which I can then look at in my reports. So then, for example, once I edit it through adding Linktree as a regular expression to my organic social traffic within that custom channel group, I can go back to my traffic acquisition channel, then go and customize my report. This is a little bit fiddly, and then add it to my report as a new dimension. And once I've done that, I'll be able to actually see all of that traffic reorganized into these channels retrospectively. We were never able to do this in Universal Analytics, and now we can. And this is really, really valuable, particularly if your groups weren't set up correctly. I do many growth audits for clients, and reassigning channels has always been a really, really manual task when you want to look at the most accurate possible channels. Or you might want to split out, say, instead of paid social, you may want to have meta ads traffic versus TikTok traffic versus Pinterest traffic. You can really customize that and then look at it retrospectively, which is why it's so, so powerful. Finally, I want to touch on GA4 and search. So search in GA4, unfortunately, is a little bit basic. It's not like Universal Analytics, where we used to be able to see search queries. We have, under the engagement section of our reports, we have a plain events area similar to Universal Analytics. If we actually customize this report, you are able to add a custom dimension for search term. And there you'll be able to actually see all of your search terms, as well as the number of searches, the total users that made that search events per user. Unfortunately, this revenue isn't at present, from what I've seen through most integrations, split out by revenue, but it's quite basic. And unfortunately, there's sort of not a lot more that we're getting from GA4 right now, which we're hoping will eventually be further developed. You can't use Explore reports to delve deeper into these metrics. What I would love to see GA4 develop is an engagement rate for that particular search term, or looking at the adds to cart that result from that search term, or the purchases that result. That would be really, really valuable to us. Hopefully that's coming in the future. But what I do recommend is that you look at your search platform. So if it's Searchspring, you already have these total unique searches and the products that were revealed for each search results page. You can also see some high-level metrics of the percentage of or the impact that search has had on your users specifically. What I do want to see, though, in GA4 is connecting the dots from that search term through to the individual actions that were taken prior to the purchase, so that we can understand that user behavior. Jacinda, I think you're on mute.
Just a couple of things from the Searchspring side that we get a lot of requests from customers that GA4 can really help with as well. So definitely leaning in to the Searchspring console for your search insights whilst GA4 develops search. And also additional things like tracking banner clicks. I know our customers love using inline banners and primary banners. Within GA4, you'll be able to set up tracking of these links as well, so that you can get engagement over how people are using these banners on site for you. Just moving on as well, just briefly chatting on segmented merchandising. So this is a really powerful tool that we have at Searchspring, where you can actually look at the audience that's coming to your site. So we can segment based on either things that you're sending us from, Shopify, for example. If you've got customer tags that are identifying that your customers are VIP customers or they're wholesale customers, you can send us those tags and we can do segmented merchandising through that. We can also set up tracking in GA4 for this as well. And then just to what Kate was mentioning around sort of engagement by channel as well, looking at the ways that we can optimize traffic from those channels. So if you see that TikTok, for example, is a really high engaged audience that's coming to you, looking at segmented merchandising, looking at creating maybe specific landing pages for your TikTok audience that are maybe a bit more content heavy, a bit more tailored to them, and also being able to A/B test strategies on those pages. So using those rich channel insights within GA4 to really look at how you are merchandising for your specific users that are coming to your site as well.
That's awesome. I think that having GA4 develop out some more of the search features will also do a really good job in closing that loop with the particular search terms that are being used, the particular search landing pages as well that are driving adds to cart purchases and all the other actions that we want to see along the customer journey. So hopefully this will be finalized soon, but yeah, you guys definitely have some great features that are useful in the absence of that. Mm-hmm. I want to just touch very briefly on Explore reports. It is a new area of GA4 that is under reports in the main navigation. You are provided with a whole bunch of different templates that you can play around with and leverage and create custom reports from. Just some examples of how those are being used currently by my clients. We like to look at things like new users by week to identify the periods of growth that we're seeing and where traffic might be coming from. So looking at new versus established users as a dimension, followed by total users as the metric, so we can really understand that new user growth over time. We also like to look at lifetime value. So particularly, again, as I said earlier, if you have quite a lot of data in your GA4 account, a couple of months, we can start to look at lifetime value by first user mediums. So the channel through which they were acquired, we can look at the total lifetime value average, as well as the engagement duration in the absence of that. Remember, Google won't be able to track every single purchase. User ID tracking is only as good as the data it has available. So we do need to look at things like engagement duration and engagement metrics in the absence of that. But lifetime transactions as well can be really, really valuable to look at over time and over lengths of time when you're looking at quarterly reviews or budgeting periods.
Kate, just a quick time update. A couple of minutes left.
Yes.
So if there's anything you wanted to cover, and then we can do a very quick key takeaway and action.
I said this would be packed, and I knew this would be more information than I could get through. I do want to just touch briefly. I do have an online course called Google Analytics 4 for e-commerce. If you are looking for more data to learn more about GA4, I literally cover everything. So it's 5 hours of video lessons with full live demonstrations of where to find everything in GA4. So looking at the different integration options, the fundamentals that you need to know for GA4, including those exploration reports. I go into all those specific exploration reports you need for e-commerce, looking at advertising and attribution and how you can use GA4 to better identify attribution, custom configurations, backing up your UA data. I provide templates for that as well that will make that super quick and easy for you. How to analyze your data, looking at drawing actionable insights with actual examples from my clients, and then looking at Looker Studio dashboards as well. So I have some Google Looker Studio dashboards, what was called Data Studio dashboards, all ready to set up for GA4 so that you can report like an absolute pro. So I recommend you check it out. I'm actually offering 15% off for June using this code 15OFF-June. And I believe Searchspring will be following up with that in an email. So don't worry if you forget it later, but check it out at ga4forecommerce.com. Let's get into some questions, shall we?
A couple of questions that we've got left here around comparing date ranges. So is it possible to see an increase, decrease like Universal does? And then also, should conversion rate be visible in the acquisition?
So date ranges, I'll pop back here if we're not getting to those questions. Date ranges, yes, you definitely can. That should be available in the date dropdown and comparisons as well. It's not visually, I think, as easy to compare and to see the differences as Universal Analytics was. Just from a user experience design perspective, I don't love it, but that is definitely available the same as Universal Analytics. The only challenge is that if you've only set up your GA4 account in the last 12 months, you won't be able to see year-on-year data. There is no ability to import Universal Analytics historical data into your current GA4 account. It's a brand new account. That's why it's really important to set it up as soon as possible, because year-on-year data, you're going to need to wait a year. So unfortunately, up until then, you're going to need to look at your GA4 data and manually compare it to your backed up data that you've connected to your Looker Studio dashboard. Unfortunately, we're all in the same boat there. There's not a lot we can do about that.
We've run out of time for today. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, Kate. This has been really awesome. I hope everyone's gotten a lot of value out of it. I would say if we close with just a final key takeaway, something you want people to action out of this, for me, it's definitely, if you're a Searchspring customer, jumping into your console and getting GA4 connected as soon as possible. And what would it be for you?
Look, I would just recommend getting in and using the platform. The best way to learn is by doing. Get in there, have a play around, have an experiment, learn as much as you can through Googling and just analyzing your own data. That's the only way I learned, and the way that my clients are all learning as well. So yeah. And just keep an eye on Google's GA4 updates page for any updates with new features as well.